let us all offer our respect and congratulations as a coalition and as partners to the government of Iraq on the recent liberation of Mosul. The government of Iraq is represented here today by Dr. Nawfal Hassan from the Office of the Prime Minister and our good friend Ambassador Fareed Yassin. Welcome. We are also pleased to have Bayan Rahman, the Kurdistan Regional Government's representative here in Washington with the Iraqi delegation. Bayan, welcome. We all owe a debt of gratitude to the leadership of Prime Minister Abadi and the heroism of the Iraqi security forces, the Kurdish Peshmerga, and so many volunteers who took up arms against ISIS. These forces have suffered significant casualties in one of the most difficult and intense urban battles since the Second World War, while placing protection of the civilian population at the top of their campaign plan. As President Trump told Prime Minister Abadi in a phone call just a couple days ago, the liberation of Mosul is a milestone in our shared fight against ISIS. But it is not the end of the war, and we are committed as a country and a coalition to ensure ISIS's total destruction. I was in Iraq when Mosul fell to ISIS a few years ago, and I happened to be there just days ago as the battle culminated, working with our Iraqi partners, many of whom seated in this room. This has been a long 3 years, from the collapse of 7 Iraqi security force divisions to their rebuilding into one of the most proficient and now battle-tested forces in the region. So it's worth reflecting a moment on how far we've come. In June of 2014, ISIS, fueled by tens of thousands of foreign fighters from as many as 120 countries around the world, was able to mass and maneuver large military formations nearly at will across Iraq and Syria. Journalists and analysts predicted the imminent fall of Baghdad. ISIS rounded up and massacred one by one 1,700 Iraqi Air Force cadets near Tikrit and uploaded the footage on YouTube. It committed acts of genocide against minority groups, Yazidis and Christians, and murdered anyone who contested its rule. The ISIS spokesman, a terrorist named Mohammed Adnani, declared, quote, "This battle will soon rage in Baghdad." He declared to the world that this so-called caliphate would, quote, "remain and expand throughout the Middle East and into Europe," and he called upon Muslims from around the globe to come and join their fight in Syria and Iraq. ISIS, of course, never reached Baghdad. The Iraqi people and its security forces, with support from so many in this room, regrouped and fought back. Today, ISIS's so-called caliphate is rapidly shrinking, and the units we have trained as a coalition in Iraq have never lost a battle. I think it's worth reflecting on that point for a moment. We've now trained as a coalition over 100,000 members of the Iraqi security forces, and the units we have trained have defeated ISIS in every engagement. Not only that, these units are now the pride of Iraq. Just last week, when Iraq's elite counterterrorism forces began a recruiting drive for 3,000 positions, they received nearly 300,000 applicants. This is a remarkable trend and a total transformation from only 3 years ago. The terrorist I mentioned earlier, Mohammed Adnani, who also planned attacks abroad, including in Paris and Brussels, is now dead, killed by a coalition airstrike last year near the Syrian town of al-Bab. This is the fate of nearly all ISIS leaders. In total, Iraqi forces supported by our coalition have cleared over 65,000 square kilometers of territory in Iraq and Syria. All of this territory is held. ISIS has not reclaimed any of this ground. We have freed over 4 million people who had been living under ISIS in 2014. And most importantly, we've helped set the conditions for people to return to their homes. In Iraq alone, nearly 2 million people who fled ISIS have since returned to their homes to restore life to their communities once controlled by these terrorists. That rate of returns in a post-conflict environment is unprecedented historically, and is testament to what we have done as a coalition by working together. So Mosul is the prime example. Nearly 1 year ago, we gathered here in Washington to prepare the pending campaign in Mosul. A quote that was used during that day was from our former President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who said, quote, "The plan is often useless. It's the planning together that is indispensable. By planning, we anticipate, we adapt in a dynamic environment." In Mosul, we worked together for 6 months on a comprehensive military, political, and humanitarian campaign plan. On the political level, thanks to the leadership of Prime Minister Abadi and President of the Iraqi Kurdistan region, Masoud Barzani, we worked to ensure full cooperation between Iraqi security forces and the Peshmerga, a level of cooperation we later saw on the ground. Few, including ISIS, anticipated that. We supported Prime Minister Abadi's policy and the government of Iraq's policy of decentralization, empowering local people to take charge of their communities after the battle, and ensuring full coordination between regional, provincial, and national authorities. On the humanitarian level, we planned with the United Nations and the government of Iraq for nearly 1 million displaced people from Mosul. Our coalition raised the funds to ensure that the UN and associated NGOs had what they needed to address even a worst-case scenario. To date, over the course of the Mosul campaign, there have been nearly 940,000 displaced people. And our colleague Lise Grand, who's here, who led the humanitarian response for UNDP, reports that every single one of them, every one, received assistance and aid. Lise has done a tremendous job, and I think we all owe you our respect and gratitude. I think this is one of really an unprecedented combination of military and humanitarian response plan with the international community working together. At the stabilization level, we plan for the day after, with emphasis on immediate needs, including locally drawn police force, clearing landmines left by ISIS, restoring electricity, water, sewage, rubble removal, and work programs. The results are now visible in East Mosul, where only months after the battle, over 220,000 people have returned to their homes. 350,000 boys and girls who about 6 months ago were living under ISIS are now back in school. Markets are bustling and life is returning to the streets. Even in West Mosul, where the battle was most intense over the past 4 months, we are seeing thousands returning to their homes and beginning to pick up their lives after ISIS. Now, the old city of Mosul is a different story. This dense urban core was the final stage of the battle and has been in the news with photos of devastation from months of house-to-house and room-to-room fighting. There's one reason for the intensity of this battle. Hundreds of ISIS terrorists from all around the world, as far away as China, gathered in the old city, nearly all of them wearing explosive suicide vests, barricaded in fighting positions, using civilians as human shields. Over ISIS radios, terrorists holed up in the old city were speaking French, Chinese, Dutch, Russian, and Arabic with a non-Iraqi dialect. These terrorists rigged buildings with explosives, destroyed them as Iraqi forces approached, including the Grand Mosque of Al-Nouri, which had stood for nearly 7 centuries. They paraded civilians in front of their fighting positions, hid behind women and children, and used a hospital just north of the old city as a killing tower, placing snipers to murder civilians trying to escape. The world has not seen an enemy like this in decades, at least, and there is no neat and tidy way to root out suicidal terrorists from urban buildings. This is a war. Yet Iraqi forces place protection of the civilian population at the top of their mission, often at great risk to themselves. Where Iraqi forces fail to live up to their own high standards, the Iraqi government is investigating allegations, which we encourage. Iraqi forces also sought, at the top of their campaign plan, to ensure that suicide bombers from Tajikistan or Tunisia, who found their way to Mosul to terrorize the Iraqi people, would die in Mosul, rather than escape to terrorize us elsewhere. And they succeeded in that mission. For ISIS foreign fighters, there's no escape. The battle in Iraq is far from over. Iraqi forces, with our support, will soon move to liberate remaining territories controlled by ISIS, including Tal Afar, Hawija, and Al-Qaim. We will support them in the military campaign and in what comes next at the humanitarian, stabilization, and governance levels.